Welcome back to the network. I'm Griffin, and we have an absolute firestorm erupting in Canada's economy tonight. The foundations are cracking, and it starts with the forestry sector, where lumber titan Interfor just triggered an earthquake, announcing devastating production shutdowns that will cripple their operations in both Ontario and across the border in the United States. As if that bombshell wasn't enough, we're now seeing the contagion spread to Quebec, where Domtar has slammed the brakes on its Maniwaki sawmill, effectively terminating the financial lifeline for scores of hardworking families who are now facing total uncertainty. And who stands in the middle of this raging inferno? None other than Prime Minister Carney, who, true to form, is being condemned for chasing applause on the global stage, polishing his international image while the nation's core industries are being hollowed out from the inside. We're told he's a financial genius, but that genius seems to evaporate when it comes to protecting Canadian jobs. He's lecturing the world while the Canadian economy is being brought to its knees. The announcement from Interfor has sent a seismic shock through an already fragile industry. This isn't just some small, localized adjustment. We are talking about one of the continental giants of lumber production, a behemoth, now scaling back its operations across the entire board. Mills in Ontario are going silent, American facilities are reducing output, and a staggering 145 million board feet of lumber are being ripped out of the North American supply chain. For the men and women on the front lines, the fallout is catastrophic and immediate. We're seeing work hours slashed, layoffs handed down, and entire towns that were built on the back of the forestry industry are now staring into an economic abyss. The parking lots are empty, the machinery is cold and silent, and the families who have poured generations of their lives into this industry are now forced to ask if they even have a future left in their own country. The official line is that the housing market is to blame. With interest rates soaring to unsustainable levels and inflation absolutely crushing family budgets, new home construction has slowed to a glacial pace. The demand for lumber has simply evaporated, but that's only half the story. The real story here is the glaring difference in leadership. In the United States, even when facing identical market pressures, there is a fundamental confidence that the economy will pivot and adapt. Their leadership under Trump projects unwavering strength. They're forging new deals, finding new buyers, and reassuring their workforce that the pain is temporary because there is a plan. They believe in their ability to win. But here in Canada, under Mark Carney, there is nothing but a deafening silence. There's no strategy, no words of reassurance, just a void where leadership ought to be. He's been far too preoccupied with his international vanity projects, negotiating fighter jet deals, and fighting global trade battles to even notice that one of Canada's most vital industries is collapsing right under his nose. This isn't just about economics, it's about a crisis of confidence. Interfor's decision is a direct indictment of failed leadership, and it proves that right now, Canada is a ship without a captain. Mark Carney has meticulously crafted this image of himself as the sophisticated former banker, the steady hand on the tiller. But if you dare to look beyond the scripted photo ops and the empty rhetoric, you'll find a grim reality. Inflation continues to run dangerously high, pushing families to the absolute breaking point. The cost of everything, gas, groceries, housing, is spiraling out of control, creating levels of stress we haven't seen in decades. Household debt has reached historic highs. And what has Carney's response been? He's been on a world tour, charming the globalist elites in Davos, talking about abstract green energy deals, and posturing on the world stage to build his own brand, all while Canadian families are drowning. This isn't just mismanagement, it's a profound betrayal of the people he was elected to serve. You simply cannot build a global reputation on the ruins of your own domestic economy. The cuts at Interfor are a symptom of a much deeper disease that is now spreading like a cancer through Canada's entire industrial base. The forestry sector is now joining the alcohol industry as another casualty of his catastrophic negligence. And the consequences are gut-wrenching. When these mills shut down, it's not just jobs that are lost, it's the entire soul of a community. Schools face funding crises. Local small businesses that depend on the mill workers begin to wither and die, and the cascading effect hollows out these towns until all that remains are boarded up windows and a pervasive sense of heartbreak and abandonment. This is the grim reality that Canadians are now forced to confront. And the longer Carney continues to dodge responsibility, the worse the bleeding will get. Because what we are witnessing is not just a corporate pullback or a cyclical downturn. It is a terrifying preview of where this entire country is headed if we do not see a radical change in leadership at the very top. As if the economic implosion wasn't enough of a disaster, Carney is now facing a full-blown social crisis, with Indigenous leaders escalating their protests over dangerous forestry practices. The core of this conflict is the industry's widespread use of chemical herbicides, which indigenous communities rightfully claim are poisoning their land, decimating wildlife, and posing a severe risk to human health. The government in Ottawa made hollow promises of consultation and environmental protection, but under Carney's watch, those promises have completely vanished. So now, Indigenous groups are left with no choice but to organize their own demonstrations, demanding answers and calling out these massive corporations that are already on the financial brink. Instead of stepping in to de-escalate the situation and show some semblance of leadership, Carney has been completely absent, allowing these tensions to boil over into a full-blown crisis. He has left these forestry companies trapped between a collapsing market on one side and furious environmental and social pushback on the other. This isn't leadership, this is abdication. He is actively enabling the destruction of Canadian families, workers, and businesses, and we cannot let him get away with it. The fallout from these tariff threats is creating sheer panic. Investors are getting spooked, mills are halting their plans, and workers are being forced to abandon their posts with fewer and fewer options for survival. This is a devastating triple threat: a crumbling economy, escalating social division, and a complete paralysis of political leadership. And through it all, Carney's instinct remains the same: stall, deflect, and desperately search for the next international headline to distract from his failures at home. But Canadians are seeing right through the act. They see a leader who has failed at the most basic functions of his job. A leader who talks a big game on the world stage but delivers nothing but ruin for the communities he has left behind. And the contrast with what is happening just south of the border is becoming sharper and more painful by the day. Canadians can look right across the line and see a different model. They see Donald Trump using moments of crisis not to hesitate, but to project absolute decisiveness. When Carney dithers, Trump acts. They are worlds apart. And this damning comparison is precisely why Carney's political authority is evaporating before our very eyes. When Interfor announced these shutdowns, the reaction in Canada versus the United States could not have been more starkly different. In Canada, the media framed it as yet another catastrophic blow to a nation on the verge of total economic collapse, with absolutely no clear path forward. Meanwhile, in the United States, under Trump's leadership, the narrative was one of resilience and strength. Trump wasted no time in spinning a potential setback into a demonstration of American power. He forcefully reminded the world that America does not buckle when market conditions change, it adapts and overcomes. He immediately started talking about securing new buyers, opening new markets, and ensuring that the United States remains the undisputed center of the global supply chain. The optics are just as important as the policy. Even as some American mills were also forced to scale back, Trump radiated an aura of unshakable confidence. The American people trust him because he has a proven track record of putting them first. He made it crystal clear that America is, and always will be, in control of its own destiny. Now, compare that powerful message to the pathetic dithering from Carney. While Trump speaks with absolute certainty, Carney is failing. While Trump is masterfully shaping the international narrative, Carney is losing his grip on his own country. One leader uses challenges to fortify his nation's strength. The other doesn't even seem to comprehend what he is doing. And with every passing day, Canada's weakness becomes more glaring. This is the raw power of leadership. The American economy faces downturns too, but with Trump at the helm, Americans have faith in their ability to recover. In Canada, under Carney, the people see nothing but a rudderless ship, drifting towards disaster with no vision, no answers, just a terrifying silence while their industries are dismantled piece by piece. This isn't just about lumber anymore. It's about credibility. Trump has it, and Carney never will. Just as Canadians were attempting to process the shock from Interfor, another hammer fell. Domtar confirmed it was suspending all operations at its sawmill in Quebec. On the surface, the numbers might seem smaller, about 80 workers laid off. But for a town like Maniwaki, it is a death sentence. For the second time in a single year, these workers are being cast aside. And the company is placing the blame squarely on the crippling United States tariffs, which now exceed a staggering 35%, making it impossible for the mill to compete. This isn't just a job site. It's the beating heart of an entire community. When those saws fall silent, the paychecks stop, and the lifeblood of the town drains away. Local businesses will lose their customers, and families will have no choice but to pack up and leave. Yet again, the federal response has been a complete and utter void. There's no emergency relief plan, no meaningful engagement with the families whose lives have been shattered, and no signal whatsoever that the government in Ottawa has any control. The politicians remain insulated in their comfortable bubble on Parliament Hill, completely detached from the devastation. For the people of Quebec, Carney's leadership feels like pure abandonment. The bigger picture could not be any clearer or more painful. The Interfor news was a disaster, but the Domtar shutdown proves that this is a deliberate pattern. Two major companies in two different provinces with the exact same tragic outcome: layoffs, uncertainty, and entire communities being sacrificed. This is not a coincidence, my friends. This is a calculated collapse, and it is happening directly on Mark Carney's watch. Meanwhile, south of the border, Trump is pointing to these exact moments as undeniable proof of the fundamental difference between America and Canada. He states it plainly: when American industries face a hit, they innovate and adapt. When Canadian industries get hit, they fold and die. That is the brutal contrast that Carney simply cannot escape, and it grows more damning with every single plant that goes dark. The implosion of Canada's forestry sector is not an isolated event. It is a key part of a much larger economic decline that has been festering for years and is now breaking wide open. Inflation is still running rampant, grocery bills are soaring, and household debt is at an all-time high. For decades, Canada's economic strength was built on the pillars of its core industries: forestry, energy, farming, and manufacturing. These were the foundations that provided stability and gave workers confidence in their future. But under this administration, one by one, those pillars are being systematically demolished. The alcohol industry has already collapsed. Now, the forestry sector is being extinguished. And for our other key sectors like energy, mining, and agriculture, the warning lights are flashing bright red. When a mill shuts down, the damage radiates outward. It hits the local diner where the workers used to eat, the gas station where they filled their trucks, the schools that relied on their tax dollars, and the local sports teams that depended on their sponsorships. It rips the very fabric of these communities to shreds. And when multiple industries are hollowed out, it doesn't just weaken the economy, it obliterates national confidence. It creates a country where people lose faith in the promise of opportunity, and the younger generations are forced to flee, many of them heading right across the border to find the future that was stolen from them at home. And through all of this, Carney acts as if his only priority is his global reputation, rather than the survival of the very people he is supposed to be serving. Every time a Canadian company falters, it reinforces the narrative that the United States is the only reliable leader left in the Western world. Trump projects American strength and leverage at every turn, and with each Canadian factory that closes, his argument becomes impossible to deny. The truth is simple. This is about an accelerating trend. Canada is losing, and it is losing badly. Carney has no plan to stop it, and this economic emergency is rapidly becoming a full-blown political crisis. With mills closing and towns on the brink, people are no longer whispering their frustrations. They are shouting them from the rooftops. The anger at Mark Carney and his catastrophic lack of leadership is no longer confined to rural communities. It is spreading like wildfire into the suburbs and the cities, as everyday Canadians finally wake up to the terrifying reality that their jobs, their savings, and their children's futures are slipping through their fingers. Carney came into office surrounded by the mystique of an elite international banker. His resume was supposed to save Canada, but that polished image has failed to translate into effective leadership here at home. Voters now see a man who is far more concerned with pleasing foreign diplomats and climate activists in Europe than with helping a laid-off mill worker in Alberta, Ontario, or British Columbia. The disconnect is staggering, and when leaders fail so spectacularly, their opponents rightly seize the opportunity. Conservatives across the country are sharpening their attacks, successfully framing Carney as an out-of-touch globalist who has abandoned his own people. They are pointing to these shuttered mills as concrete proof that his economic policies are a disaster. This is no longer a debate about lumber tariffs. It is becoming a referendum on the very soul and future of Canada's economy. What makes this moment so explosive is the constant comparison to Donald Trump, who has masterfully positioned himself as the fierce defender of the working class, the president who prioritizes oil, steel, and gas. Every time Canada loses another plant, Trump's core argument gets stronger. America is winning because its leader protects its workers. Canada is losing because its leader is obsessed with winning global approval. Carney knows this, and it terrifies him. That's why his public appearances have become so erratic. He lashes out, accusing his opponents of fear-mongering and blaming abstract global conditions for failures that are the direct result of his own disastrous policies. These public tantrums might energize his most loyal supporters, but to the average Canadian, it just looks like raw desperation. The political stakes could not be higher. The battle lines are being drawn, not just between political parties, but between two fundamentally different visions for Canada's future. One that rebuilds the nation on its resource strength and industrial backbone, and one that is willing to sacrifice it all for the sake of international approval. The unraveling of an industry, an in-depth analysis of Canada's contemporary lumber crisis. Introduction. Canada's softwood lumber industry, a cornerstone of its national economy and a defining feature of its industrial identity, is currently navigating a period of profound crisis. Recent large-scale production curtailments by major corporations such as Interfor and Domtar have sent shockwaves through the sector, resulting in significant job losses and casting a pall of uncertainty over resource-dependent communities. The decision by Interfor to reduce its output by 145 million board feet and the subsequent idling of Domtar's sawmill in Maniwaki are not isolated corporate actions. Rather, they are symptoms of a complex web of interconnected pressures. This crisis is fueled by a confluence of domestic economic headwinds, long-standing international trade disputes, and divergent political philosophies regarding industrial strategy. While some narratives frame the issue as a straightforward failure of domestic leadership, a more objective analysis reveals a multifaceted challenge involving cyclical market forces, protectionist trade policies, and fundamental questions about Canada's economic future in a volatile global landscape. Domestic economic pressures and market cyclicality. At the heart of the lumber industry's immediate woes lies a significant downturn in the North American housing market. The forestry sector is intrinsically linked to residential construction, and as demand for new homes wanes, so too does the demand for lumber. In response to persistent inflationary pressures, central banks in both Canada and the United States have implemented a series of aggressive interest rate hikes. This monetary tightening has made mortgages significantly more expensive, cooling what was once a red-hot housing market and causing new construction projects to slow to a crawl. This cyclical downturn is a primary driver behind the reduced demand that forces companies like Interfor to scale back production. It is a classic market correction, where producers must adjust their output to align with lower consumption. From this perspective, the production cuts can be seen not as an arbitrary collapse, but as a rational, albeit painful, business response to prevailing market conditions that are largely outside the control of any single government or corporation. The argument that this is purely a political failure overlooks the powerful influence of these macroeconomic forces, the enduring shadow of the U.S. Softwood lumber dispute, layered on top of these cyclical market dynamics, is the perennial and deeply contentious issue of the Canada-U.S. softwood lumber dispute. This trade conflict has been a recurring feature of the bilateral relationship for decades, centered on the American claim that Canadian lumber producers are unfairly subsidized because they harvest timber from Crown lands at administratively set prices rather than at market rates. U.S. lumber interests argue this constitutes an unfair advantage, allowing Canadian companies to engage in what they term predatory pricing. Consequently, the U.S. Commerce Department has periodically imposed significant anti-dumping and countervailing duties on Canadian softwood lumber imports. These tariffs, which have at times exceeded 35%, place Canadian producers at a severe competitive disadvantage. They artificially inflate the cost of Canadian lumber in the U.S. market, squeezing profit margins and making it difficult for Canadian mills to compete. As evidenced by Domtar's shutdown in Quebec, these duties can be the tipping point that renders a mill economically unviable, particularly when coupled with softening market demand. While Canadian governments have consistently challenged these tariffs through international trade tribunals, the protracted nature of the dispute creates a climate of persistent uncertainty that stifles investment and long-term planning within the Canadian forestry sector. This trade barrier represents a structural impediment, complicating any recovery that might naturally follow a domestic housing market rebound. Socioeconomic consequences and community impact. The consequences of these mill closures and production cuts extend far beyond corporate balance sheets. They tear at the very fabric of the communities that depend on them. In many rural regions of Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia, a single sawmill can be the primary economic engine, supporting not only its direct employees, but also a host of ancillary businesses, from local diners and gas stations to equipment suppliers and transportation services. The loss of 80 jobs at the Maniwaki Mill, for example, has a multiplier effect, reducing local commerce and eroding the tax base that funds essential public services like schools and infrastructure. This economic hollowing out leads to significant social dislocation. It forces families who have lived in these towns for generations to confront the difficult choice of either relocating to find work or facing long-term unemployment. This process can lead to a brain drain of younger workers, an aging population, and a gradual decline in the vitality of the community. The resulting loss of national confidence is a palpable, though less quantifiable, consequence. When foundational industries appear to be in terminal decline without a clear strategy for replacement or transition, it fosters a sense of national anxiety about the country's economic trajectory and its ability to provide stable, prosperous futures for its citizens. The political dimension. Divergent leadership and national narratives. The crisis has inevitably become a focal point for intense political debate, often framed through the lens of contrasting leadership styles and national visions. The narrative presented in the source video casts the situation as a direct result of Prime Minister Carney's globalist agenda, contrasting his perceived inaction with the America First protectionism of former U.S. President Donald Trump. This framing suggests that a more nationalistic, industry-focused approach would have shielded Canada from these pressures. The argument posits that while the U.S. leadership projects strength and a commitment to its domestic workforce, Canadian leadership appears preoccupied with international relations and climate initiatives at the expense of its traditional resource sectors. However, an alternative analysis suggests a more nuanced reality. The Carney government strategy could be interpreted as a long-term effort to diversify Canada's trade relationships and reduce its economic dependence on the often unpredictable U.S. market. By pursuing trade deals with the European Union and other partners, the government may be attempting to build a more resilient economic foundation for the future, even if that strategy offers little immediate relief to the beleaguered lumber industry. Furthermore, navigating the U.S. trade relationship is exceptionally complex. A more confrontational stance on tariffs might risk escalating the trade war, potentially harming other sectors of the Canadian economy. The political challenge, therefore, is one of balancing immediate crisis management with long-term strategic goals, a task complicated by deeply polarized political narratives. Conclusion. The crisis facing Canada's softwood lumber industry is not the result of a single point of failure, but the product of a convergence of powerful forces. Cyclical economic downturns driven by rising interest rates and a cooling housing market have suppressed demand. This cyclical pressure is severely exacerbated by a structural trade barrier in the form of punitive U.S. tariffs, which are rooted in a decades-old dispute over subsidization claims. The fallout from this 1-2 punch is devastating for resource communities, leading to economic decline and social instability. Politically, the crisis serves as a flashpoint for a broader debate about Canada's economic identity and its place in the world, a debate between a vision rooted in the strength of its traditional resource industries and one that seeks to pivot towards a diversified, globally integrated future. Ultimately, a sustainable path forward will require a multifaceted strategy, one that addresses immediate community needs, aggressively pursues a lasting resolution to the U.S. trade dispute, and articulates a clear and coherent long-term vision for the future of Canada's industrial base.